Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name's Sam and I'll be your host today. I'm the marketing manager at BrightCloud, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our fireside chat on Zero Trust Security. Before I introduce my colleagues, it's worth me pointing out that all attendees are currently in listen-only mode. We've had some questions ahead of the session, but you can still submit questions as we go along by using the questions pane on the right-hand side. We do really want this session to be led by the audience, so please do ask some questions as we go, especially if you want us to cover a particular topic in a bit more detail. The session is being recorded today, and you'll get a link to the recording later on this week. So answering your questions today is Andy Grover. He's our technical director, and one of our senior consultants, James Talbot. Welcome both. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Like to see you've both got your log burners on in the background, and what a cracking jumper, James.
I thought I'd make an effort.
Yeah. So I'll hand it over to you, Andy, to give a. Oh, actually, before we do that, we've got just a quick reminder of what's on the agenda. So we're going to sort of briefly talk about the traditional approach to IT security. The new challenges that have been created this year from the increase in remote working, why you can't really trust anyone or anything, exactly what is Zero Trust Security, how it works, and then we've also got a few takeaways of some quick wins that you can implement right now. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Andy. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. So I'll just give you a very brief background in BrightCloud for those of you that don't know who we are. Been in business 20 years this year, founded as an MSP from the off, been through a development curve that's, we built our own infrastructure as a service, desktop as a service, backup DR as a service, so on and so forth. We work mainly with the SME sector. And our principle has always been to try and bring enterprise class IT management to the SME sector. And I think it's more relevant now than ever, actually. Obviously, I'm not going to go on about this year. We all know how this year's gone. But it is important to understand that a lot of things have changed this year, more change than ever before. And what comes with that is a change in risk. In some cases, new risks have appeared that didn't exist in your particular environment before. In other cases, the risks have simply got larger because things like remote working has become the mainstay rather than the side case. And we talk about traditional security not being up to today's challenge. We firmly believe that zero trust security is something that everybody should be considering and adapting it to your own environment. But first of all, let's step back and look at what traditional security means. So at this point, I'm going to ask James, if you don't mind, James, can you just describe what we talk about when we talk about traditional security? What do we mean?
Of course, yes. So IT systems have always been centric around the idea of you have an office, you have an internal network, you have servers and you have clients on that network. And you have this almost protected bubble when you build it out. Generally, you've got an edge firewall or appliance and a router which gets you onto the internet, and that's all locked down and secured, so the bad people on the outside can't get in, which is almost like your moat around your castle that you've built. Then inside, you essentially have all of your IT gear, and there are no more barriers and no more walls inside the castle walls. So essentially, you've got this hardened outer shell, but then on the inside, it's pretty much free reign for people to move around the systems and get to what they need to do. Now, moving forwards, things have started to change. Not everybody's inside your network anymore, especially with the prevalence of cloud. And as you can see in the little pictogram we've got there, things like Office 365, Salesforce, and many other systems are now actually out on the internet. And these can be directly accessed outside of your traditional castle and moat infrastructure. What that then leaves you with is no protections between your users who aren't inside your castle accessing these external systems. And conversely, if you get something bad inside of your castle, then that means there are no more protections in place. They're already inside your shell. This is how things used to run. It does not really fit now with the modern way that we use our IT systems.
Yeah, it's fair to say that your applications and your data are your most valuable assets. And yeah, they're no longer locked in the castle. They could be anywhere. Because they're moving to the cloud, that's been accelerated by this year and COVID. And of course, more people are using personal devices to connect with those applications and have various levels of access to that data. So this is where zero trust comes in. A lot has been talked about by various people about zero trust. And there's a lot of manufacturers who are using it to promote their products, which is absolutely fine. Everybody's got to make a living. But I think it's the purpose of this event today was to try and cut through a lot of that marketing messaging and try and get to something that you can practically use in your own business right away and potentially without spending an awful lot of money. So our view about zero trust is that it's a set of guiding principles that are based on not trusting anyone, anything, or any network. You can see on the screen there the Gartner definition, which is great, but it's a bit convoluted and a bit complex, and we really wanted to try and break it down into practical steps that SME type businesses can do to make themselves more secure. James, you maybe want to tell us why right now we shouldn't be trusting any of these things.
So it's a good question. My answer to that is we never should have ever trusted anyone or anything. However, I think the risk profile has dramatically changed in the past 10 years or so. IT systems were seen as a requirement to do specific tasks and provide a basic level of access control and enumeration of who people are to access basic services such as file and print services and maybe the odd line of business app. Nowadays, we use IT for everything. You've only got to look out on the street and watch people wandering around with their phones attached to them constantly. They couldn't find their way out of a paper bag without using Google Maps or the equivalent on Apple devices nowadays. And if someone wants some information, they'll ask their smart speaker. So we are wholly dependent on very complex technology stacks nowadays. And due to that and the amount of data which is contained within their systems, we really need to stop using security by obscurity. Oh, they'll never find that because they won't look, because they do. And those assets are now a lot more valuable to our companies. So we can't trust users. Users are designed, as I say, users consume your IT systems to get their jobs done. They don't care about security generally. It's something that gets in their way. They just want to be able to do their jobs. And the whole point is they get a good user experience and they do what they need to do. Devices are getting ever more powerful. My smartphone is I think it's got something tough like about 6 gig of RAM and an 8-core processor in it, and it fits in my pocket. If we think back in the days when things were counted in megahertz and didn't do very much, they're frighteningly powerful. They also have huge amounts of storage. So all of a sudden you can't really trust the devices anymore because the sheer amount of horsepower and data carrying capability they've got. A lot of them are also connected to the internet as well with modern cellular technology. Then there's quite a bit of bandwidth available. And of course the network itself is what connects everything together. So by definition, if you've got the ability to move data around and you're a bad person, then how are you going to do it? You're going to shift it across the network. So we can't trust the user, we can't trust the device, and we can't trust the network.
So here we go then. Starting to get into the principles now. So relating back to why you can't trust users, they could be being impersonated by somebody else. And this is one of the simplest and most common attacks at the moment is somebody taking over your identity online. What can we do about that, James?
So Microsoft run one of the largest software as a service platforms in the world. We all know it as Office 365. I believe now it's now branded Microsoft 365, so I'll make sure I correct myself on that. Otherwise, I'll have the Microsoft marketing police shouting at me. But essentially, they deal with an incredible number of attacks on a daily basis, and their root position is protect the identity. The identity is king to everything they do, which is actually obvious in the way their service model now happens. You no longer license things based on the computer it's attached to because people use multiple devices. You'll see that it's attached to the identity, so everything revolves around the identity. Now, Microsoft did a study a little while back, and their attitude is passwords are dead. The issue with the password, it's something you know, but it's something you can quite easily give up to other people. And for people who've got better things to do, they're not going to remember their password. So we all know the old adage, it's stuck on a Post-it note, it's written in the back of their little black book, it's set to something weak. And going back to my point before about just how powerful computers are nowadays, password complexity requirements have now got to the point where they're no longer very acceptable to users. So rotating passwords often and making them set upper and lower and more than 10 characters and so on and so forth only goes so far. So inevitably, the user's going to end up either writing that down or setting it to something which is guessable or stealable by a threat actor. So one of the big things is look at introducing a second level of authentication. It's commonly called multi-factor authentication, or MFA for short. Microsoft, as part of their studies into identity protection, believe that 99.9% of identity thefts would be circumvented by using a strong MFA mechanism. There are many flavors out there of MFA which can meet your needs. A lot of cloud vendors nowadays actually just include it as part of their platform. Microsoft, I believe it's a small licensable fee to bolt in, and it's included in a lot of packages anyway. But they have MFA either through an app on your phone, which uses push notifications, which is deemed as quite strong. They do, they can call you and give you one-time passwords. They can also send you text messages. But the point there is you've got something you know, which is your password, and you have something you have, something you possess, which is your MFA token. And when you combine those two together, it's very much more difficult to steal both of those pieces of information to be able to then try and breach your account.
Yeah, I think it's a good point about most cloud apps including some form of 2FA, MFA these days. So that can be a very low cost thing to do, because you maybe just need to find it in the control panel and turn it on. Certainly with Microsoft 365, most of the packages include MFA. But then there are other companies, the like of Okta, who will pull it all together to you and for you and manage access to all of your various apps. Citrix have a similar thing with their Citrix Workspace, where companies are essentially providing a single sign-on solution with multi-factor authentication. So you go through one set of questions and answers effectively to get validated, and then you get access to all your apps. Contextual based access. This is another potential low cost thing you can do to enhance security. And once again, I'll ask James to explain a bit about that, please.
Of course. So contextual based access is the principle of not just allowing or denying an identity to be able to access a system, a piece of data, whatever it is. It's also understanding in which the context that they are accessing it that becomes important. A very good example of this, I'm going to use Office 365 again as a good example, is they have a technology which is called conditional access. And conditional access allows you to have policy-based rules which dictate when people can access resources, what sort of challenges they are presented when they attempt to access resources based on information which is collected about them. And I'll give an example of that. So I've got a Office 365 account and I want to access my mailbox. Now, I'm UK based and I also work from home. So we use strong authentication at BrightCloud. So I have to multi-factor authenticate if I am logging in from my internet connection from my home in the UK. And the decision to use multi-factor at that point is made by a conditional access policy, because essentially it states if this person logs in and it's not a trusted location, then challenge them with MFA. Now, we also use Citrix at BrightCloud, and when I log on to our Citrix services, due to the fact that's hosted in our trusted data center, and we are using another technology called seamless sign-on to give us a good user experience, I'm not challenged for my MFA when using that piece, because I've already been challenged to get into Citrix in the first place, and our security protocols state that because I've already been securely challenged to get onto the platform in the first place, then I don't need to do that again. That can then be taken further, and we can turn around and say with conditional access, well, what happens if you suddenly see a login from another country? Well, I am UK based and I have no reason to access my mailbox or any of the other Office 365 services from any other country as it stands at the moment.
You're saying you don't work when you're on holiday?
So not if I can help it. But what it gives me is I can then put another conditional access policy, which is based on geolocation. So if I suddenly get a login attempt, which comes from, say, China or Brazil or another country in the world, I can have a policy which states block that login, because that is not normal behavior. And that is some basic examples of contextual based access. And you can imagine they can get very, very powerful. And they also move into another point, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is actually monitoring your environment and what that actually demonstrates for you.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I think it's, I mean, you've used Office 365 as an example, because, you know, a lot of people do have that available to them from Office 365, whether they've enabled it or not. But yeah, plenty of other products. So there are other gateway type tools that you can, you may already have, that you could enable contextual access with. Time limited access. What do we think about that one, James?
So this one can be really, really basic. So how many people on this call have office spaces? I'm going to suggest quite a lot of them. And how many of these office spaces are 24/7? I'm going to suggest not that many. There are some which are manufacturing or might have extended hours, but aren't necessarily open 24/7. Do you leave your Wi-Fi running? I'm going to guess you do.
Well, certainly, yeah.
But why? So all that's giving someone the ability to do is sit in the car park outside and have a go and see if they can break into your Wi-Fi and get into your network. If there is no requirement for the Wi-Fi to be running, turn it off. Very, very basic form of time-limited access, but very, very powerful. At that point, your threat actor can't just sit in his car outside. He has to physically break into the building and plug into a network port to attempt to gain access to your network at that point. So he's probably going to go somewhere else, because that's a lot of effort and makes a lot of noise kicking doors in, so they don't tend to bother. You also have other people as well. Another example I like to roll out is third parties and contractors. So as I work for the professional services team at BrightCloud, I do a lot of work for third parties where I get very high level of access, privileged access within their systems to be able to make transformational change for them. A good example is working with a large NHS trust at the moment. I've been doing a lot of work with their core identity management platform, which essentially means that I've got the equivalent of God keys to their platform. However, that is a set piece of work which is designed to run over a set period of time. So, and one of the trusts I work with operate under zero trust principles. So my account automatically expires at the end of every month and is reviewed to see whether it should be enabled again. This means that at the end of the project, my account will definitely be disabled and my access revoked without the requirement for human intervention. So it removes the human error component. And that's another form of time-limited access, which you can easily put in place and is available to you.
Okay, and you mentioned just then, you mentioned monitoring. So what can we do to see what's going on? Do we have to go out and buy very expensive SIEM, IDE, IDP systems, or do we have things available to us that can give us a lower cost way of monitoring what's going on in our networks?
So this area is a little bit of a minefield because if anybody's done some research into looking at heuristic monitoring software for the network, it's start looking at things like Darktrace and other products which are available, they see a frighteningly large number attached to them, and also the level of complexity they can bring, and just what the cost benefit is by running those things. However, you're probably consuming services right now and didn't realize that some heuristic behaviors are already being monitored for you, and you might not be leveraging what you've already paid for. Another good example, I always roll it out, Office 365. So the Office 365 platform, because it's a global platform which government bodies from all around the world, including UK government bodies, we've got American government bodies, we've got public sector, so people like the NHS and other sensitive organisations, plus standard corporations who want to protect their corporate assets, are all using these platforms. BrightCloud are ISO 9001 and 27001 accredited, so we have to make sure that we can maintain those competencies by vetting everything that we use. And part of that is being able to prove that the platforms we use comply to certain standards, which include those standards on Office 365. Now, if you actually have a look within the Office 365 portal, if you've got administrative rights, you'll see within the admin center there are a lot of sections in there for the various applications, but they also have a security center and a compliance center. And they also have the ability for you to generate what they call a secure score. And what this secure score does in the background is it's actually monitoring how your environment is being accessed. So an example of a secure score element which you can tick the box for is that you've managed to stop using legacy security protocols such as TLS1 and TLS 1.1 as they're now deemed as insecure. Microsoft constantly monitor your tenancy and produce this report counter to state whether it has seen anybody using those insecure protocols accessing your tenancy over the past X number of days. That's a good example of this monitoring of heuristic behaviors, and it's already available to you and you can already go use that information. We also have things like a lot of people are still running on-premises Active Directory. Active Directory will produce a lot of logging information into your event logs, but some of it only if you've actually switched it on. Now, what you'll find there is it's a lot more traditional because we all know what it's like digging through Event Viewer. You get spaffed with millions of rows of data that you have to work your way through, but that information is then in there. There are some third parties out there which actually will produce some software which will help collate that information and will show you any trends, like if you're getting lots of failed logons from specific accounts and other bits of information which can go be collected. You can then move right into the very expensive end of the spectrum, where you can start looking at monitoring network traffic and looking for anomaly analysis based on trend over time. A good example of that is you've got a file server which contains about 10 terabytes of data. And generally on a day-to-day basis, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, it probably sees less than a terabyte of that data access, less than 5% of it changes, and network traffic-wise probably passes a few hundred gigs in a day, maybe. Some of this clever trend analysis software can monitor this, put baselines in place for the servers, and then when it sees odd behavior, like all of a sudden you've passed 10 terabytes of data, and your network card's maxed out for the past hour, that's not standard behavior. So it can start raising red flags and get you to go investigate what's going on, because it could be data exfiltration by a threat actor at this point. But there are many levels of this. There's the basic stuff of, am I doing what I think I'm doing right on my environment? Looking for behaviors based on log analysis, and then moving into the big tools where you start looking at network flow and data access and other bits and pieces for odd behaviors.
Yeah, I think this is probably the area where we do see a spend being required in some way. It could be, Citrix is an example I go back to quite a lot, which is if you're using any of Citrix's cloud-based services, there's a product called Citrix Analytics, which wraps around that. And if you haven't got the bundle that includes the analytics, then you can just add a small add-on to get the analytics, and you get a lot of this kind of behavior analysis from there. I'm sure the same is true of many other tools and technologies and software. Of course, there are service providers that will do this sort of stuff as a service. We're not one of them. We're not trying to push that, but yeah, we're very much trying to encourage people to look at what they've currently got access to and see if they can make more of what they've already got before going out and spending money. And if that is a gap that you have got, then that's probably a good place to spend some money, so you can actually find out if there are bad things happening. VPNs is something I thought we ought to touch on, because there is this goes back to the traditional approach again. So a lot of people I speak to that, you know, I know friends that are working from home. No, I'm secure, I'm using a VPN. Doesn't actually mean you're secure. It used to be considered a smart way of getting back into the castle through the moat or over the moat. But these days, with everybody working from home, you're coming from a network which potentially shouldn't be trusted. We don't any longer consider VPN to be a secure mechanism, because VPN is potentially trusting your device because you're coming from a corporate device. Again, James, you could probably help me out here with your views on where a VPN sits and where its weaknesses are.
Certainly, yeah. So I'll try not to go slightly off topic with this, so I'll get that bit out of the way first. But VPNs have a use case to access traditional on-premise resources. A lot of resources nowadays are in the cloud. I was at a Microsoft Teams event down at Microsoft headquarters about a year ago, and I was actually speaking to the development director of Microsoft Teams, and he says 95+% of problems that they have with Microsoft Teams is that people attempt to continue to consume IT the traditional way and route all internet traffic from their end devices back through their core data centers via VPNs and such like. And Teams is very much designed from the ground up to be decentralized, understand your location and optimize the service based on the fact that you've broken out locally on internet connection. So using fully captured VPN tunnels with modern applications nowadays actually breaks functionality and can give you a worse user experience. So as an aside, be careful when using VPNs just from that point, because things have changed. Now, VPNs themselves, as Andy pointed out, we don't trust the device anymore. Even though it's a managed device, there's a certain amount of trust that we can perform to say that actually the device is managed, we've validated the device is what it says it is connected to the VPN service, and now our data in transit is protected by the VPN component. However, that is still an attack vector for a threat actor. So a good example here is people don't realize how easy it is to steal Wi-Fi credentials from an end computer or an end device. And there's actually a one-liner of PowerShell. If anybody's interested, throw it up in the chat and I can actually send you the one-liner. It will quite happily show you every single SSID and every single password in a PowerShell window that is configured on your machine. And if you've got local admin rights, it won't just show you the ones that you've added, it will show you ones which are machine-wide as well. And that is by design. They're not designed to be secure. The whole point of a Wi-Fi password, it's a known secret which starts your security encryption on the network, which then gets rotated very quickly by the WPA protocol. But the fact that I can steal that very easily from, let's pick on a guy called Bob, say, and Bob loves his movies, and Bob also frequents the local coffee shop quite a bit because he's got a bit of a caffeine addiction. And he's sitting in the coffee shop on his work laptop. He's got his personal mobile phone with him as well. And because it's a personal mobile phone, it's not managed, it's not looked after, it hasn't been patched in forever. And across the way, you've got the bad threat actor man is currently sniffing to see if he can see any insecure devices connected to the coffee shop Wi-Fi. And sure enough, he finds Bob's phone. Not long afterwards, he managed to break into Bob's phone and steal some information from it. And Bob, being Bob, he has saved his work password on his phone because he can never remember it because of the stupid complexity requirements, and they don't use MFA. So all of a sudden, the threat actors managed to steal Bob's password. This guy that's sitting in the coffee shop now has Bob's password for his computer. It's sitting on the same network, and that computer is connected to the VPN. So all of a sudden, he can start doing some very interesting things at that point, and people wouldn't think twice about going to the coffee shop and sticking their laptop down, firing at the VPN and going, it's all secure because I'm on VPN. What they don't realise is that the machine isn't protected. All it does is protect any data you're sending from your computer back to the office space, but it acts as a conduit. It's like sticking a ladder up across the walls of the castle. If you can traverse said ladder and someone else can get to the base of it, they can too. Andy's also popped up.
We're running over a little bit, so that's that's great. Thanks. I was just going to whip down to our final slide because we have run over by a couple of minutes. We would welcome talking to anybody that would like to spend a bit more time on this, and we can talk to you about once we understand what environment you've got, what sort of tools you've already got available to you. We might be able to help you approach zero trust with some of the things you've already got. There's some points we've made there on the screen. Those have come from experience. The auto forwarding of email is one that we came across twice this year, where a phishing attack had hit somebody in Office 365 and started auto forwarding email, all of their accounts, any invoices and all that kind of, really key data that you don't want going in and out of somebody else's business. And I thought it was worth, I put up the link to the NCSC because they are working on a set of principles. It's in its beta release now. It was there were 10 principles when it was alpha. They've now dropped it down to 8 as they're trying to simplify it. But that's a useful resource to keep an eye on because I always think of they're the security advice for the people. I think of. Yeah, I think. If there's anything else you wanted to add, James, I think we need to wrap it up here because we're over time. But by all means, do get in touch and see if we can help you take a few steps towards zero trust.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thanks, James. That was a really good overview there on zero trust security. We did have a few questions. I think you've answered most of them as you've been going along. The one we had was, is there a process or an assessment that people can use to sort of identify how they stack up on zero trust security as it stands now? So I guess it's doing a bit of reading on that blog and having a chat to us, and we can sort of help them out, identify some weaknesses.
Yes, I think so. If you take those principles that the NCSC has put in place, that's a really good starting point. And if any of that's not clear, we'd be happy to help.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's also just worth pointing out that there's no rigid framework process which you can follow with zero trust, as it is principle based. So it's very much dependent on how your business is built and how you consume IT. So it's very much done on a consultative approach, and that is certainly something that we can help with.
Okay, fantastic. If anybody's got any more questions, then obviously feel free to shoot us across an email. All of our details are on our website, which is bright-cloud.net. Thanks again, and we hope to see you again soon at another fireside chat in the new year.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Hope that's been useful. Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, guys.